Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Katie Kelly. I work in University Communications. I'll be kicking us off, and then I'll hand the presentation over in the second half to Doepke. We are recording this presentation, so if you want to catch it on demand or share it with a coworker, we will be sharing the link in our December newsletter that goes out to the SAMS email list. And if you have any questions throughout either of the presentations, you can drop them in the chat and we will get to them when we can, or we'll take it at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so this workshop is using insights to guide content. And we are going to cover first how to access data, then platform demographics, how to customize your data, and then Ellen will cover optimizing for success, creating reports, and using insights. Everything we're going to cover today uses the native platforms. So if you're not a Sprinkler user or Sprout Social or whatever program you might be using, you'll be able to do the things that we're talking about here. And then if you are a Sprinkler user, you should be aware there's more advanced reporting functionality. And if you have questions on that, you can talk to me offline, send me an email. So to kick us off, I'm going to go through each of the major platforms just so everyone's aware of where to click to find the data, because sometimes they're buried in a sea of menus. So on Facebook, you're going to go to your page, and in the Manage Page panel, you're going to click Insights. Then on the next page that opens up, you'll choose which type of insights you're looking at. And then you'll choose your time frame for the data you're looking for, and you can export the data if you'd like to. On Twitter, you have to first activate analytics on your account if you haven't already done so. To do that, visit analytics.twitter.com and log in with your Twitter account. That will activate the ability to pull analytics. Once that's on, you will choose the 3-dot additional menu options icon, and then analytics from the menu that appears. And then choose tweets to get the main Twitter information page, or you can choose the drop-down menu for some additional options. And then if you choose the tweets panel, this fourth box is what appears. And on that page, you can choose your time frame and export the data there. On YouTube, you'll click Your Videos, or you'll go to, I think it's studio.youtube.com to open the Content Studio. And then from there, you'll choose Analytics. And again, in the corner, you can choose your time frame. And there's tabs along the top to get into different types of data. Instagram is annoying with their API limitations. You have to pull insights from your phone. And you have to first convert to a professional account if you have not done so already. So it's sometimes called creator account or business account in different documentation, but you'll convert to that type, connect it to a Facebook page, and then you'll be ready to go. So once you're logged in on your phone, you'll choose Go to Your Profile by choosing your icon in the bottom right, and then choose the menu at the top and choose Insights from the menu that appears. And then you can tap each row to view more insights from there. In this case, screenshots are probably going to be your friend if you're checking insights on the fly before they kind of disappear from view. And you want to check these regularly because it's harder to access the older data. With LinkedIn, you'll go to your page where you are an admin of your page. You'll click the Me menu at the top right, and then under Manage, you'll choose the page that you're looking to pull data on. And then from there, you can choose the Analytics dropdown, and there's a few different insight pages there. And then you can export as well. So questions along these lines, Misty pointed out business.facebook.com on a laptop will show some Facebook and Instagram analytics as well. That's a great point. Now that Facebook and Instagram are much more integrated, you're able to pull things through that business management. So that's another option. And then regularly, as far as checking on Instagram, I am not familiar with how the reporting works on the business portal. So if you're using that, you might not need to look as often, but the data isn't available beyond, I think, 7 days in the default view on a phone. So if that's the approach you're looking at, you're going to want to do a probably a once a week reminder to check. And if you're looking at story data, you'll want to check, I think, 24 hours before the story disappears. I'm going to get into a bit of platform demographics next. This data is pulled from Pew Research Firm. Pew is a company that does analysis of the internet and different media uses. This report, the fact sheet, is as of January through February of 2019. That's the most recently they've done the study. So that's the data we have. And this is demographics for the platforms in general among United States users. This isn't specific to MSU accounts. And I will be sharing these slides, so don't feel like you need to take notes on all these. So we'll start off with Facebook. I'm going to go through these in the order of the highest to lowest percentage of US adults who use the platform. So Facebook has the majority, 69% of US adults are using the platform. And you can see the breakdown here. It crosses all boundaries in terms of age demographics, skews slightly more towards female, and the way Pew does their study, their gender is binary, their race topics are only in 3 categories, so this is their data. Pretty even across the education spectrum, urban, suburban, rural, etc. So Facebook is pretty much going to get the majority of the country. YouTube has 73% of US adults using the platform. Skews a little more towards men, younger. This is not the platform to get the senior citizen alumni pool, but you will get most of the younger demographics for sure. Instagram, 37% of US adults use Instagram. This one we see a little bit more skewing towards urban and suburban, more than rural, skews more towards women and younger audiences. LinkedIn, only 27% of US adults use the platform. It's pretty even in terms of gender, fairly even in the younger age ranges, but again, not a highly used platform among the 65 and up group. And you can see here it's used by a majority of college grads. So this is a good option for alumni, more so than high school or less. Pinterest, used by 28% of US adults, 42% of women use it. It skews heavily towards females. Urban, suburban, or rural, it's all pretty even. Does skew a little more towards college grads and more towards younger demographics. Snapchat is 24% of US adults. Again, probably you would expect this is skewing much more in the young demographic of 18 to 29, so heavily used more in our current students and young alumni groups. Twitter, this might be surprising that it's only 22% of US adults using this platform. Pretty even keel between women and men. Skews more on the, I would say, young alumni, current student, slightly in the like Gen X baby boomer area, but more younger than not, and more college grads than high school or less, more urban and suburban than rural. Um, so it is, I debated about what order to present these in because Twitter comes so late in the list and it might seem odd that that's a platform that we push heavily. But what I want to point out here is just because a platform has a lot of users across the country doesn't mean it's right for your brand. We don't have a Pinterest account at the institutional level because Pinterest does nothing to drive our brand goals, but Twitter does. So that's why we would use Twitter and not Instagram, or sorry, not Pinterest. WhatsApp is used by 20% of US adults, um, more Hispanic users than um, the other demographic groups here, which is just interesting. They didn't call out why that might be, but WhatsApp is known for being used with more international audiences, so it could be reflective of families in different countries or things like that. Urban, suburban, rural, it's used more in the cities than not. And this one skews more heavily towards high school or less education. Reddit is only used by 11% of US adults, but I will say, just from what I've seen on the platform, it's a very passionate 11%. So even though it's a small platform, there might still be something there for your team to look at, even if it's just being aware of what it is, how it works, and listening to see what people are saying about your programs. Reddit doesn't really approve of brands inserting themselves in conversation, though. It's much more anonymous and user driven. So content that's posted there needs to feel natural to the conversation, which is why we do a lot of listening there. Ellen called out the subreddit MSU. There's some great material there, but we don't post anything as the institution because it wouldn't feel right on the platform. But the platform does skew more heavily to the current student, young alumni demographic. And actually the majority or the highest population group has a college degree. So along all those, the data that you can get from the platforms, you can also customize your data. So if you've exported the data, you can choose to add extra fields or annotations, and this can make your reporting more powerful. One way to do this is with custom fields. So you can create labels and ways of segmenting the data. You might choose to do this by post type. So noting if it's a graphic or photo, video, link, or a story. You might bundle things into campaigns, or we use brand pillars in our shop, but that would be like a content category. You could track which hashtags you use, different programs, initiatives, or departments that are under your umbrella, content themes or areas of research, where you got the content, which could be useful if you're trying to make the case for budget and knowing whether you need interns, that sort of thing. Your target audience, so if it's a message that was crafted for alumni versus for current students or prospective students. So any of these labels, you can choose which ones are important for you to measure. And then when you export the data, you can add it as a column in the spreadsheet and then have yourself or an intern go in and tag all the posts so that they're categorized as appropriate and use that to generate reports. And of course, Sprinkler users, we can set this up so you can do this in Sprinkler and then generate reports in the system based on your fields. You can then take your data and use visualization tools. Context is important, so knowing how much engagement a post got is great, but it's even better if you can compare that to another post and what your average is. So is 4 followers a lot? It really depends on the context. On Instagram, no, but in a dark alley, yes. Ways to do this, you can do it with Excel or numbers, whichever spreadsheet tool you use, you can just generate reports there. Google Charts is another good option. There's Google Data Studio, which I believe is free as well. Chart Builder, Tableau, these are all options you can use. Some tips no matter what platform you're using. Make sure you block off time to pull and clean your data. It can take longer than you think it's going to. So if you set a recurring, a Friday 10 a.m. meeting with yourself, or maybe it's once a month, you block off a morning, whatever works for you, but block off time so that you get to it and you do it regularly. Set up a regular reporting cadence, depending on how often you're going to need to report out to others. You might find that once a month works for you, or maybe quarterly does, whatever suits your needs. But make sure you're reporting regularly so that you can see trends and how your content strategy is impacting your numbers. Keep it simple. Don't create custom fields just for the sake of it. Make sure it's something that you actually want to report on and can take action based on the data. So if you're not going to look at the data, then don't bother adding that categorization. It's better to start small. I recommend you document your labels so that everyone knows what a tag refers to. Have a labeling dictionary. So if you were to give an intern your spreadsheet and say, go ahead and classify all of these posts, it should be easy for them to determine how to classify each one. And if you had interns that cycled through, it should be pretty consistent from person to person how things get tagged. And documenting is a good way to ensure that. Make sure you tie your KPIs back to your goals. You need to be measuring things that matter. So if you have goals related to engagement, then you need to make sure you're measuring your engagement and you're displaying those in your reports. Make sure all your sources, filters, and time ranges are clearly labeled in any dashboards or reports you're generating. Ideally, a dashboard or chart or whatever format you're presenting should be able to stand on its own. If you have to go through and explain it to someone and walk them through it, then there's not enough structure on the report. They should be able to get it in an email and understand it. You might need to explain it the very first time so people get oriented as to what they're seeing if they're not familiar with social. But after that, they should be able to understand whether this is last month or last week or last quarter and what platforms they're looking at, for example. You should avoid pie charts. It might be controversial because I'm sure we all see pie charts in presentations, but by and large, pie charts are some of the hardest graphs to understand from the human eye. The way that the eye and the brain perceive and kind of understand it gets tripped up on the area of the chart. So if you can throw something into a bar chart or columns or other different ways of illustrating the data, people will be able to understand it more accurately. And make sure you keep a list of annotations to explain any data anomalies. You might find that Twitter had a data issue or Facebook purged some profiles and it impacted your follower accounts or your engagement values on a particular time span. Make sure you keep a record of that. So a year from now, when you're doing year-over-year reporting, you'll remember what that glitch was and you don't have to go back and dig through things. Any questions so far on the data accessibility or this portion? Okay, if anyone thinks of any, feel free to throw it in the chat And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and throw it over to Ellen to take over for the second half.
All right, let's get started with the second half here. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about optimizing success. So I think the first thing you always need to think about is tying everything back to your goals as a department, as a unit, as an organization. So for us, one of our main goals is to increase affinity and really deepen relationships with our audience. So that isn't measurable, but what is this. So for us, that goal essentially comes down to increasing valuable engagement across platforms by 10%. So making sure that whatever your goals are, you're really assigning a real value to them in a way that you can actually measure whether or not you moved the needle on that goal. And then thinking through, like, okay, what are the tactics that we're going to do to try to drive this? So for us, for this particular objective, what can we do to really increase valuable engagement on social? One of the things that we know we can do is really test content. So when we're sharing a story of some sort, we can test a photo versus a video. We can test different ways that we write the copy, things like that. We can also do things like really look at analytics and data to make content decisions. So deciding whether or not we repost or share something, things like that. Another way to, for us at least, really increase valuable engagement is using user-generated content. So really building the community and acknowledging and sharing what other people are doing. And then another goal for us is to really deepen relationships. So that means driving traffic. So what we are looking for with this particular goal is measuring the number of clicks to MSU Today by 5%. And one of the tactics that we can do to try to affect that number is coming up with new content ideas. So different ways of telling stories, maybe trying a Reels versus a traditional video, or trying to make a GIF that we've never done before, things like that, to really try to innovate and do new things. And then another thing for us that's really helpful is looking at our paid strategies. So making sure that we are investing in our content that we know is doing well. So for us, we really look at when something performs above benchmark and is the kind of story that we want to promote, and we want more people to see it, being comfortable putting paid behind it. One of the ways that we really are able to capture and look at insights that help us make content decisions is by meta tagging everything. So we use all of these different meta tags. They're about 2 years old, and we actually just started the process of updating them again to align with our larger switches and adjustments that we've had with all of our content as a department and as a unit. So some of the things right now that we are looking at is post types. So that's whether or not something is a photo versus a graphic. And then looking at, does it contain the hashtag Spartansville, yes or no? Does it link to an MSU property? Who made the content? Was it a member of our photo video team? Was it an intern? And then our social content type is it Spartan Spirit? Is it affinity? Or is it affinity and esteem? Here's a little look at one of the drop downs of what this would look like. So this is the one we most recently updated. So we want to be able to differentiate between MSU Today, the homepage, another site that we own, so something like the Together We Will site. Is it a website that we don't own but is an MSU website, so if we're driving to a college, or are we driving to something like Forbes or is there no link at all? So being able to really track these things for us is really important to know how social is affecting our goals and our objectives. All of these meta tags go into this really intense chart on Tableau. We're right now rebuilding this in Google Studio, but also we're able to build something similar in Sprinkler. And you could also, I'm sure, use Excel or Sprout Social or whatever else you're using. You don't have to use Tableau to do this, but essentially it just creates a benchmark for us. So all of the little dots are social posts, and you can really cut up the data by meta tag. So we can look at just Facebook, we can look at just video, we can look at just video on Facebook. So all of those meta tags have a purpose. We can also look at campaign. So for example, I would be able to compare our campaign for our holiday greeting from this year and look at last year and the year before. So all of the different posts we've done around a particular campaign or topic. Here are our platform benchmarks for 2019. I think it's really important to have some sort of benchmark, whatever that looks like for you. Essentially, a benchmark is just taking all of your posts. So say you have 10 posts, add up that engagement and then divide it by 10. You can also take out the highest performing and the lowest performing. You can kind of just come up with what works best for you and how you really want to measure your data. At the end of the day, I think the most important part is just having some sort of scientific and data-driven fact that you can share with people so that when you're reporting on social content performance, it's not about your opinion. It takes a little bit of the emotion out of it, I think, and I think that's really important because I'm a creative, so I totally get and understand sometimes when you work really hard on something, and this has definitely happened to me where it didn't perform very well. So I think just having a really scientific approach and having benchmarks, you're able to make that conversation when you're reporting on performance a little bit smoother and a little bit easier for everybody. Again, just taking out some of that opinion. We also use UTM or link shorteners. So we use go.msu.edu, but you could use Bitly or other services. We just want to be able to track all of the different sources that traffic comes from. So this is what ours looks like. So we put in MSU Twitter, MSU Facebook, MSU LinkedIn. Everything that you click on from our social properties has these added on UTM parameters. So you will see when we go back into Google Analytics where that source again was from. So I can see MSU's Facebook post drove this many page views in Google Analytics, Twitter, LinkedIn, they've gotten this many page views. So really being able to identify where your traffic is coming from is really important. For us, we know that Facebook just drives the most traffic. So if I need to help sort of affect that number and that goal of driving traffic, I know Facebook automatically is a really good place to do that versus something like Twitter, where maybe surprisingly, people don't actually click as much. So you're using that data on a daily basis, but how do you create a report and really share that with others who aren't on social all the time? So for us, this is just a little screen cap of Sprinkler. We focus primarily on engagements. So I think that things like reach are important, but don't really tell you a lot about audience behavior. So engagements tell me, okay, people interacted with this, they took the time to take an action, that's valuable. So I usually look at monthly, quarterly. I've been doing a lot of like COVID era reporting just because the last 7 to 8 months have been really similar. So I feel like comparing everything that's happened in this period against each other is really fair. It doesn't feel as fair to sort of compare this time right now to this time last year, because we were in a very different world, and everybody's behaviors were really different. Social was a different world as well. So I think that those are all good ways to sort of look at data when you're putting together a report. I'm a very visual person, and I find it helpful to make something that looks a little bit more like, oh, okay, I totally understand what that post was or is, rather than just having the name, being able to provide a visual or a picture, a screen cap, whatever I can to show people, okay, here's what did the best. I think that's a really easy way to sort of consume a report. And then I think it's important to also sort of note any sort of patterns or themes that you're seeing, providing context. Numbers are great, but for instance, we might know, wow, we've had a huge increase on Instagram in engagement in the last month. Well, context tells us that we had an issue and people were spamming our content about this particular issue. So numbers alone don't tell the whole story, and I think it's really important to be able to provide some of those insights in that context when you're writing or sharing reports. So looking again, comparing either last quarter or looking at last month, comparing it against something, I think is really helpful to provide context. So me saying like, okay, we've got X number of engagements this month, that doesn't mean anything. I need to be able to say we got X number of engagements this month. Here's how it looks in comparison to last month. Here's how it looks in comparison to this time last year. Being able to identify content or topics, different pieces of content, so photo versus video, what performs best on different platforms, I think is really a great insight to be able to share with leadership or anybody that you're reporting to. And then finding other themes or patterns. So if you're looking at your top 10, top 50 best performing posts of the year, say, being able to identify, is there a pattern there? Are they all video? Are they all written? Like, what does that look like? So really diving into that data, and again, just not reporting the pure numbers, but adding that context. So here are some things that we found in our reporting. Obviously, Facebook is really important to social, and videos are important to them. So we find a lot of good success with videos on Facebook time and time again. We'll often see that our best performing posts of the year, every year, are videos. We have a kind of inside joke in our office that rankings, everybody loves a good ranking. So those perform really well across platforms. So we automatically know when we have a new ranking coming out, we need to be able to promote it on social and maybe create additional assets for it. We find that trending topics do the best on Twitter and really drive engagement. So I think just because of the nature of Twitter and how quickly it moves and people are posting so often and so much more than any other platform, being able to be part of larger, broader conversations is really important. So if there are holidays or hashtags or memes that we can participate in, we find that that really helps our channels when it comes to our goals. I've shared this many times, and it still always holds true. The more distinctly MSU, the better engagement that we get on Instagram. So being able to provide and share content where it's green and white or it's a campus icon, it's something that really is special to MSU, we will see higher engagement rather than sort of a very popular photo in higher ed, I think, is like a student working under a tree. If you can't tell that that's MSU, if they're not working under the resilient tree, then we don't see as high of engagement. So we're really careful about what we post on there because of that takeaway and that insight we've learned from data. We also know from data that any sort of like listicle or wrap-up story does not do well on social. I think maybe it's just a little bit too broad. For people who are kind of scrolling quickly, you need to be able to get a little more specific and kind of grab their attention. If we sort of just say like, MSU is working on cancer research, and here are 6 stories. Like, that doesn't seem to do well with our audience, but if we have a very specific story that we can pick out of that listicle and say, this MSU researcher is working on this very particular research project, and it's going to have this sort of impact, those stories do better. So again, that's something that we've learned from data, and we can adjust our strategy accordingly, and that helps our goals. We also have a know from data that UGC is great. It helps, again, drive that goal of meaningful engagement. And we have found that, again, every year, more and more of it that performs the best is user-generated content. So making sure that we're putting our effort and our resources toward looking for that content and having those conversations in DMs to try to get that content is really important. I mentioned paid advertising briefly, and I just wanted to touch on that again a little bit. So we have 2 things that we sort of focus on with paid advertising. I mentioned that if something is performing well already organically and it is above benchmark for us, and it's something that is important for us to promote, then we will put paid advertising behind it. So we wouldn't put paid advertising behind something like a picture of Beaumont Tower, because we just, that's lovely and will do great on its own, but it's not something that we feel like is an important thing for everybody to see necessarily. But something like this, that's MSU is ranked #1 in the world for education, that is something that we want everyone to see. That does something to help drive the brand and the reputation of the university. So this did really well, and we put paid behind it. And then when we look at how it did on Tableau with all the meta tags, we can see it was above benchmark. So that was a really successful way for us to use paid. We also use it a little bit more proactively. I would consider that more of a reactive approach, but we use it in a more proactive and sort of planned way, in terms of we pick 12 key stories every year that we want to promote to a particular audience. So we're really interested in promoting to a few key audiences. So we look at Spartans, we look at Michigan Public, we look at sort of like an internal audience as well. So students, faculty, staff. So being able to identify ahead of time things that we for sure want to promote, want for that to be in their feeds, is another way that we use paid. Data is really helpful too in figuring out how to resurface content. So there have been reports of anything between 2 to 6% of your followers see your content in their Facebook news feed. So there is plenty of room and opportunity to be posting something more than once. We do this all the time. So here's an example. We have this great story about the MSU football team in 1966. We first had it for homecoming and then posted it again for a bowl game. Did really well again. Posted it for Black History Month. Did really well again. I look every month at our content from that time last year. So every October, I'll be looking ahead to November and December of last year and seeing what things we can resurface, what did really well, where is there potential to post something again. And again, there always is that opportunity. Here's another quick example of this graphic that we've used many, many times, and it still always performs really well. So there is a ton of evergreen content out there. There is no reason for you to post something once if it does really well. If you posted it and people loved it, they're probably going to love it again. And sometimes resurfacing content doesn't just look like the same exact thing over and over. You can make tweaks or you can pull out pieces of it. So for this example, just this line or this phrase of like, home isn't where you're from, it's where you belong. First it was a video, and then I used it with a photo, and it actually did better the second time. So I think that there's opportunity to also use pieces of something that did well. You can also use data to retell stories. So here are a couple of examples of our solar parking bays. And first it was just a straight news hit from the LSJ. Then we made a text over video. Then we made a graphic. So for us, again, that was just something we saw with data, like people are very interested in this topic. So how can we keep bringing it to life and retelling that story? So a quick recap here. Just making sure that you're really optimizing your content to be able to gather analytics and insights. So making sure that you're meta tagging your content, you're using UTM parameters and shortening those links, whatever you can do to really be able to draw valuable insights. I think it's also really important to make sure that the data is working for you and to make sure that you're not doing anything that's unnecessary. We don't have meta tags that we aren't using. So don't do things just to do them. Do them if they're valuable and there are things that you're going to be able to really study and look at and be able to report on. And then make those data-informed content decisions and figure out how you can resurface, reuse, retell stories, letting your content really be dictated and influenced by your audience. Let them be the people who are making the decisions of what they want to see time and time again. They're talking to us. There's nothing like social. It's so real time, and there's so many good insights there. There's no other form of communications that is more rooted in data, I would argue. So being able to really use that to your advantage and make those decisions and let your audience help guide that. That is all I have. So I'm going to stop sharing. See, there are a couple of questions.
We've had a lively chat going on.
It looks like it.
So one of the questions, we've had some discussion about accessibility guidelines and concerns about using URL shorteners. From everything that I've found, it's actually better to use a URL shortener than to have a very long link, because the way a screen reader would read a link, it's easier to just hear a few letters. I think in terms of having a short page like msu.edu or natsci.msu.edu, that would be fine to share without a link shortener. But when we use link shorteners, we have UTM parameters that we're using to track where traffic comes from, and our links can be hundreds of characters long, and there's no way we'd want a screen reader to read those. So I don't think we have any concerns about link shorteners. One thing to be aware of is if a link shortener uses a permanent redirect, which is called the 301 redirect, that doesn't impact your SEO, your search engine optimization. So you don't have to worry about losing out on the SEO from the link in the name. But on social in particular, you should include a good description with the link shortener, since they can't get context from the words in the link. So rather than just throwing a link out there, you'd want to explain what the link is before you list it. And then on a website, you could have the link actually link the descriptive text, so that screen readers can be used that way and they don't lose the context. Free analytics tool, Google Data Studio is free. I think there are others, but that's the one we use. Do you know of others, Ellen?
Yeah, that's what we're going to be using moving forward. I know Josh, who does our social listening, was able to build something similar in Sprinkler. I'm assuming you could use something or build something in Excel. And I'm sure like other paid services or even free ones like Sprout Social have something that you would be able to do. I'm just not sure what the limitations are, but I think there's a lot out there that's definitely worth exploring to see what works best for you and what fits your needs.
Great. Judy asks, can you talk a bit about how you determine a yearly budget for paid advertising and what does our budget look like?
Yes, that is above my pay grade. So the person who decides our budget for paid, and I should mention that paid isn't just social, it's digital, it's a lot of different things, it's billboards. So Todd Carter is the person who really works on that, and social is a part of it. Um, and for us, we have a monthly budget for social, and we really try to focus on, again, on having a few key things that we see do well organically, and then a few planned things. So right now we have a partnership with MLive where we're proactively know every month we have these articles that we'll be promoting. So I would say we end up usually having between 5 to 10 things per audience type. So again, I mentioned some of the key audiences that we're promoting to. So Spartans, internal, Michigan public. So we have a couple of things for each group every month that we know we want to promote, and then a couple again of those things that are doing well. So I also don't think, and maybe somebody else can speak to this, I don't think that you need a huge social budget. Yes, do we have a larger one because we are the central communications office? Of course, I totally get that. But I think that you can be really effective with a smaller budget. Again, just by looking at the data and paying attention to what things do well organically. So again, I know that that's an approach that a lot of other companies, large, big, I know Pepsi uses that approach. I think that that's a great way to make a little bit of money go a long way. Again, is looking at what's already doing well and then putting paid behind it if it helps your strategic goals.
Another question, a free alternative to Sprinkler for scheduling posts. So Liz answered free Hootsuite account. That's a great option. Others, not everyone might be aware that you can schedule tweets in advance through Twitter now. And you can schedule 2 Facebook pages, of course. Instagram seems to be the problem child when it comes to scheduling apps because it has API limitations. So typically, if you're using a free platform, you're going to have much more hampered ability to schedule Instagram in advance versus Facebook and Twitter. But there are other options out there. I think TweetDeck is still around. I think that'll let you schedule. There's a few different ones. So that is an option there. And you can use Facebook to schedule feed and Instagram TV posts on Instagram. Thank you to Amanda for that information. Any other questions? Looks like that's everything. So if anyone has follow-up questions, you can reach out to Ellen or myself through email. Someone has asked if a social channel can be added to the UCN team. We operate separately, so we'll have to look into that and discuss that with our staff because our group is managed separately from UCN, and I would hate to add work to their workload because we all have enough of that going on in this work from home world, but we will discuss that. And if anyone has other questions, feel free to send us an email. We'll work on getting the recording of this made available and the slides, and they'll be in the newsletter that goes out at the start of December. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good afternoon.